She ran 300 and started a outro. In front of 300 guest stars, starship fast and sure couldn't trust, but it, and still couldn't it trust us, stars, search for the stars, rushed us straight into chaos. Welcome back. Tonight, you and I are going to wade into the suffocating shadows of a shattered family dynasty. Picture standing at the altar, drowning in a silk wedding gown you despise, mere seconds away from trading your freedom to the most dangerous man you know. This is Stephanie. Her ruthless father handpicked this enforcer to own her future. She truly thought she had outrun this toxic cycle by fleeing to Barcelona, but she was tragically mistaken. A single phone call dragged her right back into the underworld. That man waiting at the altar is no twist of fate. It teaches us a brutal life lesson. You cannot simply outrun a dark past when it pumps through your own veins. Stick with me. We are going to unpack this tragedy piece by piece. The bridal gown, draped over her shoulders, feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds. It is not just the expensive silk meant to drown a fragile soul. It is the suffocating weight of what that fabric represents. Every single stitch and every cold pearl pressed into that bodice feels like an iron binding chain binding her to the syndicate. She stands alone in the empty bridal suite of her father's Manhattan mansion, staring into a massive gilded mirror. The girl looking back is a total stranger. It is a quiet lesson that sometimes the most exquisite things in life are just beautifully disguised prisons. The truly haunting part of this nightmare, the dress fits perfectly. They built her cage without ever needing to ask her measurements. The silence of the room shatters when a deep voice tells her she looks beautiful. Stephanie does not even turn around. Her father and the king of this crime syndicate steps into the suite and shuts the heavy door. He stands tall, rocking silver hair and a dark custom suit that cost a small fortune. He plays the legitimate businessman flawlessly, but Stephanie knows the bleeding truth. She has known since a childhood how her father built his empire on broken bones. She coldly tells him not to call her his little girl. Adriano does not flinch. He just walks over and stares directly into her eyes through the mirror. It brings up a sharp reality we must remember. A perfectly tailored suit can never wash away the permanent stain of a deeply corrupted soul. He stares at his daughter, the silence stretching out like a tight wire ready to snap. You can feel the emotional suffocation in the air. This is the man who used to tuck her in at night, now standing there as the cold architect of her absolute misery. The tragedy of their bond hangs heavy in the room. He looks at her pale face, refusing to acknowledge the psychological wounds he is inflicting on his own blood. Instead of offering any comfort, he simply adjusts his expensive cuffs, looks her dead in the eye, and hit her with that classic toxic parent line, the cruel justification used to max pure control. Here is a simple life lesson to hold on to. Genuine love is supposed to feel like a safe haven, never like a calculated transaction designed to break your spirit. Just imagine the sheer agony of this waking nightmare. Stephanie clenches her hands into tight fists, shaking with unfiltered rage. She looks her own flesh and blood directly in the eye, telling him he no longer controls her life because he is nothing but a ruthless criminal. The tension in that suite is thick enough to choke on. But Adriano, the untouchable Mafia Don, does not even blink. He steps into her personal space, his voice a low rumble, claiming this marriage to the notorious Ruben is purely for her own protection. Protection from the exact same violent underworld he built from the ground up Here is a simple life lesson to keep close to your heart. Sometimes the people claiming to protect you from the storm are the exact one is who summoned the rain. Stephanie is hanging on by a single thread, ready to rip that suffocating veil off her head and shred the silk into pieces. She fires back, her voice trembling, that she does not need anyone to take care of her, but she knows getting angry with a cold mob boss is completely useless. He just absorbs her rage like a stone waterfall. So she drops a truth of her own, throwing it in his face that she already met Ruben organically in Barcelona. The Don just lets out a slow, chilling smirk. He already knew. He was the one who sent Ruben across the world to shadow her every move. Her reality shatters in that exact second. It brings up a meaningful life lessons. Just because you think you are the shot knows morals does not mean someone else is not secretly pulling your strings from the shutters. The betrayal hanging in that room operates on a completely different level of cruelty. Adriano casually drops the final hammer. He admits he sent the man to be her secret bodyguard, but claims Ruben falling for her was totally unscripted. Stephanie goes completely low play. Her voice cracks as she screams that her entire life has been the nothing but his manipulative lies. You can physically feel her heart break as she realizes her perfect romance in Spain was a calculated mafia setup. But the mob boss hits her with cold logic, stating that Ruben actually care about her making this twist arrangement perfect for his empire. Here is a life lesson you should always remember. The deepest cuts never come from your enemies. They come from the people who weaponize your emotions for their gain. The Don delivers his final checkmate. He tells her that since she already loves the guy, she just needs to walk down the aisle and put the ring on. A cold hatred settles deep in her chest like a stone. She quietly vows to never forgive him. Her father just slowly nods down and the wedding starts in exactly 20 minutes before walking out the door. Left alone in that bridal suite, staring at the tragic stranger in the mirror, something inside her breaks. Running away did not work. She needs a dark new plan. It is a harsh life lesson. Sometimes running from your problems only delays the inevitable, and you have to turn around and face fire. Now let's hit rewind and jump back 3 weeks to Barcelona, where this entire tragedy began. Let us set the scene. 3 weeks ago, Stephanie is living her bestest life in Barcelona. She is sitting at a sunny cafe near the city center, sipping a warm coffee and soaking in the pure, vibrant energy of the streets. After freezing in Zurich, surrounded by stiff suits who constantly reminded her of her father and his mafia cronies, the loud noise of Spain felt like true freedom. For a brief moment, she is just a normal young woman figuring out her life. Then the beautiful illusion cracks. Her phone buzzes with a demanding text from her father. She shoves the phone right back into her bag, refusing to face the dark reality. Here is a simple life lesson. Ignoring a glaring warning sign does not make the danger disappear. It just gives the monster more time to creep up on you. You and I need to understand how massive this escape really was. 6 months prior, she ditched New York in the dead of night with nothing but a single suitcase, a forged passport her mobster father knew nothing about, and a huge stack of cash to stay entirely off the grid. She ghosted everyone. Her mother, her little brother, and those cold security guards who used to shadow her every breath. At first, she was terrified. Every random guy on the street looked like a hitman sent to drag her back to the mansion. But as the months rolled on, she slowly started to believe she was truly free from the syndicate. This leads to a meaningful life lesson. False security is the most dangerous trap you can fall into. The second you drop your heavy armor, your dark past decides to strike. She finishes her coffee and steps into the afternoon heat, walking toward her first legitimate job at a local bookstore. Earning an honest paycheck and dealing with normal people made her feel real for once. But halfway down the street, it hits her. A freezing cold prickle right on the back of her neck. You know that horrifying feeling that someone is staring right at you. She stops dead in her tracks and frantically scans the crowd of tourists, but spots nothing out of the ordinary. She forces herself to write it off as leftover trauma from her Mafia upbringing. But here is a simple life lesson to remember. Always trust your gut instincts, because your body senses the predator long before your eyes ever do. Later that night, desperate to shake off the dread, she heads to a club. Listen closely, because this is where the story shifts. Stephanie is hiding out in a grungy club and downing drinks under flashing neon lights. It is a million miles away from her Mafia life, but that is the point. Here is a simple life lesson. Sometimes the best way to escape the ghosts of your past is to blend into the chaotic noise of the present. While her friend dances, Stephanie leans against the sticky bar. Then across the room, everything changes. She spots a man standing near the DJ booth. He is tall, looking like he just stepped out of a vintage mob movie. He has a sharp jawline and eyes scanning the room like a hawk hunting for prey. He is definitely not an average tourist, and those cold eyes do not miss a single thing in that shadowy room. Their eyes lock across the crowded room, and pure panic floods her veins. Her heart pounds like a trapped bird beating against a cage. She tells herself he is just a random guy, but when she peeks back, he is still staring directly at her. Then he drops a slow, terrifying smile. It is not flirty. It is a knowing look that says he sees right through her fragile disguise. The lesson here is simple. When the shadow smiles back at you, it is time to run. Stephanie bails, shoving her way out of the club because her father drilled one absolute rule into her head: trust no one. She is sprinting for the metro station in the chilly night air when a deep voice calls out. She whips around, and there he is, the mysterious man from the club, looking way too relaxed for a nighttime hunter. Picture the scene: a damp street at midnight. He tells Stephanie to relax, his voice thick with a practiced drawl. He promises he means no harm, but in their violent world, promises are just bait. Stephanie challenges him on the wet pavement, demanding to know why he is tracking her. He plays it off as a simple coincidence. She sees right through his game. Then he offers a quiet smile, admitting his guilt. Owning up to a mistake is sometimes all it takes to break the ice, and it actually disarms her. She steps dangerously close, blurring her personal space. She should have vanished into the shadows, but the magnetic pull is already too heavy. Our worst mistakes usually begin the moment we confuse a predator's attention with a genuine connection. Let us look at this closely. This was the second she should have sprinted away. Instead, she promises to scream and wake every sleeping soul if he tries anything. He simply nods, cold and unaffected. They wander past shuttered storefronts and bleeding graffiti, the city decay mirroring her panic. He asks for her name, and she offers a ghost, whispering Anna. He sees right through the lie, but lets the fiction survive, calling himself Ruben. When she asks about his past, he offers only his shadows. They finally reach her broken-down apartment building. She turns to face him, already caught in his orbit. The lesson here is simple and hard. Never let the beautiful stranger from the shadows follow you to your front door, because you are only showing the hungry wolf exactly where you sleep. Ruben studies her decaying building and smoothly compliments it. She calls it a dump, earning nothing but a slow shrug. Stephanie watches this phantom, wondering why her sharp survival instincts are quiet around him. She asks why he tracked her. The charm drops. He admits she looked like she was running, and he knows exactly how that cold fear feels. This shared trauma leaves her completely speechless. He murmurs goodnight to his fake Anna and dissolves into the pitch-black street. 2 days later, the quiet illusion shatters. He is casually sitting in her local cafe, drinking espresso over a crossword puzzle. Life has a funny way of teaching us that coincidences simply do not exist. The ghosts we think we lose in the dark are often just waiting for us in the broad daylight. Stephanie freezes in the doorway, her blood running cold. He waves her over like an old friend. Against every warning siren in her mind, she takes the seat. You are following me, she states, her voice trembling. He shakes his head, claiming Wednesday is his regular day. But it is Thursday, she fires back. Without missing a beat, he smiles and says he is just early. Then he mentions her job at the bookstore. Her stomach caves in. He admits he asked locals about her because people love to talk. He swears he is no stalker, offering coffee and the freedom to walk away. As every smooth answer for every single question, they are not just making conversation. They are playing chess, and you are merely the pawn. You and I have likely made a mistake like this, blinded by the ache of loneliness. She should have walked out that door. Instead, she orders the coffee, and the steel trap snaps shut. For a week, Reuben weaves himself into the rhythm of her days. They share hidden diners and slow walks under the dying sun. He never put boundaries, or ask questions that hurt. He acts as a steady anchor. She spent her youth dodging violent men, leaving her entirely defenseless against a man who simply sits beside her in peace. Finally, under the pale moon on the beach, she breaks. She begs to know why he is really there. This reveals a hard truth about human nature. When someone seems too flawlessly patient, they are usually burying a secret deep enough to drag you completely under the surface. Reuben dodges her question, offering a tired excuse about being between chapters in his life. Stephanie refuses to let him hide, asking point blank if he is in trouble. He meets her gaze and softly asks her to define trouble. Sighing heavily, he confesses his past choices angered dangerous people. He just needed quiet to breathe. She demands to know if he is dangerous. Reuben looks at her with burning intensity, whispering he is no danger to her. It is terrifying how badly she needs to believe him. I am not who you think I am. She confesses into the wind. I know, he replies instantly, effortlessly stripping away her disguise. It is a dangerous psychological trap. Never put your faith in someone who dances around your questions. That graceful dance always leads straight to the blind edge. Her heart stalls in her chest. He strips away the illusion, telling her he knows Anna is a fiction and she is more than a girl selling books boy. Then he offers the most dangerous comfort. He tells her he does not care. Her past and her ghost belong only to her. The massive walls around Stephanie crumble into dust. With tears burning her eyes, she asks why he treats her with such grace. Because you deserve it, he says, his voice thick with honesty. She leans in, kissing him like a drowning sailor finding air. When he holds her so gently, she feels a strange, forgotten warmth. She finally feels safe. But the dark truth about these perfect moments is far more sinister. The exact second you finally feel entirely safe is usually the quiet breath right before the storm destroys your world. They break apart. The ocean breeze was rushing between them like a warning. Reuben rests his forehead against hers, whispering they will sort the truth out later. She nods, and for one fragile moment, the universe feels perfectly aligned. But in stories like these, peace is always a carefully crafted lie. Three days later, her world splinters. She is locking up the bookstore when her phone begins to vibrate. An unknown number flashes on the screen. The voice that answers freezes the blood in her veins. Marco Santini, her father's most ruthless enforcer. There is no warmth or hesitation in his tone. Your father wants you home, he commands us. It is a harsh reality to swallow. You can run until your shoes wear thin, but the toxic poison of your bloodline will always track your footprints. Stephanie grips the counter, keeping the terror out of her voice. She refuses to return to that violent cycle. Marco lets the silence stretch out before dropping the blade. We have your brother, he states. Her knees give out. She collapses, crying out he is a liar, demanding proof. A second later, the frail, trembling voice of little Luca echoes through the speaker. He begs his sister to listen to their father before the line clicks dead. Stephanie stands alone in the dim bookstore, shaking nose uncontrollably. She knows the absolute depths of her father's cruelty. She grabs her bag and bolts. This is how true evil operates in the real world. Monsters never bother knocking on your front door. They simply reach into your life and violently steal the one thing you cannot live without. Let us look at this together, because this is where the trap firmly closes. Ruben finds her an hour later, sobbing into her hands on the damp sand. She forces the horrible truth out. She must go back, or her father will destroy her little brother. Ruben sits beside her, listening to the crashing waves, before speaking the words that change everything. What if I can help? Stephanie stares at him, lost. Calmly, Ruben reveals he knows her father. He knows the brutal men in her family's syndicate, and swears on his life he can keep her safe. She has no idea who this man truly is, yet he claims to understand her dark world. This is the tragic illusion of rescue, when the comforting stranger in the dark suddenly reveals his teeth. You are already locked inside the cage with him. Ruben reaches through the cold night air, wrapping his hands around hers. He begs for her trust and staring at her with frightening certainty. She looks into his dark eyes, searching for a lifeline, and whispers her surrender. Okay, in a single breath, she makes the most catastrophic choices of her young life. 2 days disappear in a blur. She lands in the grey chill of New York, where Marco and the soldiers wait on the tarmac. They throw her into a black SUV, tearing toward the family estate. Her father, Adriano, is waiting in his velvet-lined study. Welcome home, Bambina, he murmurs, the room thick with unspoken violence. It is a harsh, unforgiving law of nature. If you willingly walk back in the lion den, you're not to be surprised when the beast finally bares its fangs. Stephanie remains standing, fists clenched, demanding to see Luca. Adriano pours a glass of expensive scotch, the liquid catching the dim light. He casually mentions the boy is at school. When she screams about Marco's threat, Adriano flashes a hollow smirk. They never said they hurt the boy, as that they possessed him. It is a suffocating psychological game to break her will. He promises Luca will survive as long as she plays her part. When she asks the Prisha, Adriano shatters her universe. She is getting married. In 3 weeks, she will wed Ruben, merge to their empires in blood. The floor drops away from beneath her feet. It is a fatal error. You can never sit at the table to play against the devil. Long before the game begins, he has already stacked the entire deck. Laughter bounces off the cold marble walls, sharp and unforgiving. He asks his daughter if she genuinely believed that bumping into a European syndicate heir in Barcelona was destiny. Pure illusion, he mocks. He sent Ruben to track her, but the romance, that psychological trap, was Ruben's own masterpiece. Stephanie S. world shatters. She footballed for the door, but Marco's enforcers swallow her up before she hits the gravel. 24 hours later, she sits frozen at the family table, draped in heavy silk, staring at the man who broke her spirit. He still looks like her savior. You and I must remember this tragic truth. Sometimes the prince sweeping you off your feet is just the villain dragging you back into the dark. Picture the suffocating weight of the silence in that room. Ruben sits as from a triumpher, projecting the same calm warmth that once made her feel safe. Stephanie refuses to meet his gaze, staring at her porcelain plate, swallowing the urge to scream. Adriano attempts to play the proud patriarch, pushing for wedding dates, but Ruben effortlessly cuts him off. He demands to speak to Stephanie alone, his voice carrying a dark authority. Even a boss like Adriano backs down. The heavy oak doors click shut, leaving a space thick with ghosts. Ruben looks at her and breathes out 4 quiet words. I did not know. It is a harsh lesson for us to carry. True power never needs to shout. It speaks loudest when it whispers. Stephanie Hess' head snaps up, her eyes burning with betrayed trust. Ruben leans across the table, his perfect pleasure cracking. He swears to her, his voice rough and desperate, that he had no idea she was as the syndicate boss's daughter in Spain. He claims he was just a guy hired to tail a runaway. She does not buy a single syllable. If that is true, she spits back. Then why are you still forcing this marriage now that you know? Ruben's jaw clenches tight. He looks away, muttering that it is complicated. That is the breaking point. Stephanie shoves her chair back, the wood screaming against the floor. She yells that he used her for a business deal. Listen closely to this. When the people who hurt you claim it is complicated, they are just preparing you for absolute chaos. Look at the wreckage of this betrayal. Ruben stands in front of her, offering those wounded, soulful eyes like a shield. He actually has the nerve to tell her that he cares about her far more than he ever intended to. Tears spill over Stephanie Sneer's cheeks, fueled by pure self-hatred. She despises herself for believing in their sunlit days in Barcelona, confusing a cage with a sanctuary. She points to the door, her voice cracking as she demands he leave. Ruben offers a hollow promise to make things right, leaving her alone in the cavernous dining room. Her hands shake uncontrollably as the cold reality settles into her bones. Her own bloodline is the prison's. We must all remember this painful truth. Never put your faith into someone who promises to rescue you from the very trap they helped build. The Mafia wedding of the decade is 21 days away, and the walls are closing in fast. Stephanie spends the night staring at her ceiling. They stripped her childhood bedroom, painting over her past with suffocating cream walls. By 6 a.m, panic is drowning her. Enigavarinya, she laces up her running shoes, desperate to slip past out her father's security. You and I can feel her heartbeat as she makes it 3 blocks. Then a sleek black sedan cuts off her path, gliding in like a predator. The tinted window rolls down to reveal Marco in the dawn light. He quietly orders her inside. She wraps her arms around herself, defensively claiming she is just out for a run. But the bitter truth always catches up. You cannot outrun your demons, especially when your demons drive armored cars. Marco barely registers her hollow excuse. Stephanie loses her grip, screaming that they cannot keep her locked away like a prized prisoner. She wants to hit him, wants to shatter the bulletproof glass just to feel the sharp sting of control again. But then her eyes catch the heavy shape of a weapon hidden under Marco's tailored coat. The fight drains right out of her. She knows how this brutal cycle ends. Defeated, she sinks into the plush leather seat. The drive back to the mansion is swallowed by a suffocating silence. As they pull up to the iron gates, Markud softens his voice, claiming her father truly loves her in his own dark way. Be very careful with that kind of justification. The most dangerous wounds in life are often delivered by those who claim they are only trying to protect you. Stephanie Esclair is sharp enough to draw blood. She asks Marco, her voice dripping with venom, if her father wrote that script for him. Marco allows a ghost of a smirk, quietly admitting the sentiment was his own. It brings her no comfort. Knight's words do not bend iron bars. She forces herself up the mansion steps, her legs feeling like solid lead. Inside, her mother Elena sits at a grand table spread with fresh fruit and dark coffee, looking like a flawless, untouchable underworld queen. Elena commands her to sit and eat, ignoring the shattered soul in front of her. Stephanie takes the seat, but keeps her hands firmly in her lap. It is a quiet rebellion, but a vital one. They can drag you to the table and demand compliance, but they can never force you to swallow their lies. Elena pours the morning coffee with the ice-cold grace of a woman who has survived decades in the underworld. Born into this brutal life as the daughter of a ruthless boss, she wears that Darzant crown with absolute perfection. Stephanie has spent her life running, terrified of her becoming the woman sitting across from her. When Elena casually brings up the romantic disaster in Spain, Stephasinos, she screams that her father sent armed men to drag her back in chains. Elena's expression does not even flicker. She sips her dark roast, coldly stating that Stephanie should have recognized the marriage as a brilliant strategic move. We must watch out for this subtle poison. Growing up in the dark might teach you how to survive, but never let that darkness become your definition of normal. Stick with me here, because this is where the trauma cuts deep. Stephanie demands to know if this wedding is for the happiness or just another chess move. Elena smoothly praises Ruben, calling him the perfect asset with clean money.
Stephanie is trembling now, screaming that Ruben manipulated her from the very beginning. Her mother just waves a manicured hand, dismissing the pain.
She explains she was just a teenager when handed over to the boss, and that respect matters more than childish romance. When Stephanie desperately begs for a real choice, Elena delivers a chilling blow. She tells her she already wasted her one chance to run. It is a haunting truth we all have to face. Sometimes, the choices we refuse to make are the exact ones that seal our fate. Elena's voice remains silky smooth, but you can feel the razor edge buried inside. She calmly reminds her daughter that running away to Europe was a spectacular failure. Stephanie jumps up, the heavy chair scraping harshly against the floor. She swears she would rather die than walk down the aisle with Ruben. Elena meets her tearful eyes with pure ice. She tells Stephanie she is far too soft, foolish to expect the universe to hand her a fair deal. You will learn to be ruthless, her mother promises. Stephanie bolts from the room, unable to hold back the sobs. By late afternoon, the mansion is invaded by planners, transforming the grand ballroom into a sea of white silk. It is a cruel, tragic illusion. The most beautiful celebrations are often built to bury the most miserable, broken hearts. The estate is suffocating under a mountain of imported white roses and gold seating charts. Stephanie is paraded through her own home like an elegant hostage. She's told to stand still, fake a smile, and choose between two identical shades of ivory. She is completely dead behind the eyes, sleepwalking through a personal nightmare. Then comes Diane, a frantic wedding planner with a headset and zero emotional awareness, begging for her thoughts on the centerpieces. Stephanie numbly tells her to just pick one. When Diane reminds her that this is a special day, Stephanie almost laughs. She points across the room at her father, shaking hands on a new underworld deal. She is nothing but currency to them. Never let anyone convince you that your worth is measured by how useful you are to their agenda. The wedding planner freezes, paralyzed by a flash of Mafia reality, before nervously returning to the flowers. Later that night, Stefani turns the heavy lock on her door. The silence offers no comfort. Growing up surrounded by killers trains you to constantly search for the weak point. She mentally moves the pieces on the board. Her father, Ruben, the armed guards. Then a sickening realization hits her. Luca, her chest tightens in pure agony. Her younger brother is the exact reason she was dragged back to this underworld. If she runs again, her father will mold the boy into a monster to punish her. It brings us to a simple, painful lesson. The people we love the most will forever remain our most devastating vulnerabilities. Imagine the crushing weight on Stefani's chest. What if she could pull Luca Lauca out before their father's hammer falls? Trembling, she fires off a text, begging for a meeting. The boy answers fast. He is chained down by the Don's guards, meaning the risk belongs entirely to her. The next afternoon, a grey Manhattan sky hangs over Luca's prep school. Marco, the silent wheelman, asks zero questions. There is Luca, a kid far too innocent for the blood on his family's hands. His face breaks into pure light when he sees his sister, and she anchors him in a desperate embrace. Here is a truth we all learn eventually. Sometimes the only real light in a corrupt world is the fragile warmth of the people we refuse to abandon. Luca stares at her, completely stunned. Whispers that ski deeper forever. Stunny gently pulls back her little brother. He has the same messy hair and crooked smile, but it is now buried under an exhausted shadow. When she asks how he is holding up, his hollow answer shatters her heart. Noticing Marco hovering like a grim spectre, Luca begs for a walk. They drift into a freezing Manhattan park, the winter wind slicing right to the bone. Stefani agonizes over how to expose their father's twisted game, but Luke stops dead in the frost. His voice cracks as he apologizes for being the bait that lured her back into this cage. Owning your deepest regrets is painful, but it is often the very first step toward finally growing up. The boy is drowning in guilt. He keeks the frozen earth, confessing that their father swore she was in mortal danger in Barcelona. Realizing he was a pawn in the Don's lie is tearing him apart. Stefani holds his gaze, is her voice dropping to a mournful whisper. She tells him the danger was real, just not the kind that involves guns. As Luca stares in confusion, she shatters the illusion. That perfect man from Spain. Ruben was a ghost on the family payroll sent to watch her. When genuine love bloomed, their father weaponized her heart, turning her freedom into a ruthless mafia merger. It is a terrifying reality and a powerful lesson. We must always look behind the curtain of a perfect story because the cruelest traps are often wrapped in sweet romance. A suffocating silence falls before Luca asks the one question that truly bleeds. Does she actually love Ruben? The words hit Stefani like a physical blow. She rubs her eyes, the ache of betrayal settling in her chest. She thought she did, but how do you love a phantom who played a script from day one? Ruben claimed he was blind to the plan, but their trust is shattered. Grabs her freezing hands and begs her to run from the altar. She cannot move. If she flees, the Don will crush her brother, drag her back. She is trading her life for his safety. Luca pulls away in disgust, refusing her martyrdom. Listen closely to this truth. Real love is built on sacrifice. But you should never surrender your entire soul, just to keep someone else breathing in the dark.
Stefani warns him to watch his tone, but the fire in Luca's eyes refuse to die. He demands she stop playing the tragic martyr, reminding her that she broke out of this cage when she was exactly his age.
He is ready to walk through fire if it buys her freedom. Tears begin to burn Stefani's vision. Her baby brother is hardening into a soldier before her eyes. He squeezes her fingers, offering the match to burn the wedding down. She aches for that escape, but knows the cold cruelty of their father's wrath. She promises to consider it, and they sit in the biting chill until Marco steps from the shadows. Time is up. Remember this simple truth. Even in your most terrifying moments, the fierce loyalty of family can be the absolute greatest shield you will ever hold. Picture this standoff. Stefani rises in the frost, and Luca stands tall beside her, vowing to stay until the end. She pulls him into a desperate embrace before reality snaps back. Soon, she is trapped in Marco's car, heading to the estate in suffocating silence. Desperate, she asks the driver if he would help her disappear. Marco remains a cold brick wall. He refuses, claiming the Don pays him to keep her safe. Stefani's voice drips with venom as she asks the defining question. Safe for who, me or my father? Marco just stares blankly ahead.
She walks into that opulent mansion, knowing it is nothing but a decorated tomb. Here is a harsh truth. Sometimes the walls built to protect you are the exact same ones keeping you imprisoned.
Always question who your safety truly serves. The night deepens and Ruben arrives without an invitation. He glides past the guards like a phantom who already owns the throne, hunting Stefani down in the dark library. She is hiding behind a novel to numb the pain of reality. His footsteps echo and her stomach drops. She glares at him, demanding his purpose. Ruben closes the heavy oak doors, declaring they need to speak. She orders him out, but he casually perches on the arm of her chair. He knows she sees him as a poisonous snake, but he begs for 5 miserable minutes to explain his betrayal. Exhausted to her core, she finally caves. 5 minutes. Listen to me on this one. When a person casually stomps all over your sacred boundaries, giving them a single inch almost always guarantees they will take the entire mile. The library air is thick with tension as Ruben leans in. He confesses that when the Don first pitched this cursed marriage, Ruben flat out refused. He did not need a Hollow's wedding to secure his crown. But then her father slid a photograph the desks, explaining how she desperately wanted to escape their violent world. Ruben believed he could step in and grant her freedom. His voice breaks as he swears the romance in Barcelona was never an act. He meant to be a distant shadow. But then their eyes met. He drags a shaking hand through his hair, admitting she unraveled his cold plans. You and I both know this feeling. You can plot every move like a grandmaster, but the raw gravity of human connection will always shatter your perfect strategy. Stefani demands to know what he expected. A bitter smirk crosses Ruben's face. He expected a hollow Mafia princess, like the syndicate wives he grew up around. Instead, he found a quiet soul reading in a sunlit cafe, fighting to be normal. Stefani snaps that she is normal, but Ruben whispers she is extraordinary. She throws up her walls, ordering him to stop spinning lies. Then comes the devastating truth. Ruben confesses he cares for her, but still has to chain her to this altar. If he breaks the deal, his family will just strip him of his empire. He is trading her freedom for a blood-stained crown. Remember this rule. Never let a velvet compliment blind you to a person's true motives. Judge them by the cold chains they carry, not the sweet poetry they speak. Ruben paces the room like a cornered tiger, swearing this is not greed, is raw survival. He was bred to rule the syndicate since he was, and if he walks away as a ruthlessly cousin will usurp his throne. Stefani So's voice drips with ice as she notes he simply cannot let that happen. He stops dead. The agony in his eyes is real as he insists that securing his empire does not mean he doesn't desperately want her. He almost confesses how deep his feelings run. Stefani steps into his space, laying down the law. She tells him his love is worthless if he is willing to hold her hostage to keep his crown. The lesson here is carved in stone. A person can claim they love you until their dying breath, but if their ambition requires you to live in a cage, you must walk away. Ruben's voice cracks, swearing it is not about the throne. Stefani demands the truth, challenging him to prove why she should trust him again. For the first time, this untouchable boss looks hollowed out, whispering that he does not know how. Heartbroken, Stefani turns to leave. His hand shoots out, catching her wrist in a desperate grip. He finally admits his true cowardice. He was terrified to reveal his Mafia identity in Barcelona because he knew she would run, and he could not bear to lose her. She hits him with a gaze of pure ice, stating he never actually had her. Ruben only pulls her slightly closer. Here is a solid reality check. Building love on the foundation of a massive secret is exactly like building a house on quicksand. The devastating collapse is an absolute guarantee. The shadows seem to hold their breath as Ruben locks eyes with her. He promises Barcelona was real, untouched by the poison her father poured into her mind. Stefani struggles to breathe, crushed by the syndicate. She accuses him of setting another trap, demanding proof of his devotion. Ruben reads the raw heartbreak in her face. He slowly lets go of her wrist and steps back, admitting he has no proof she would accept her to chat. He begs for just one real chance after they're forced, warning that shutting him out means a lifetime drowning in hatred. Tears finally spill over. We see this so often. Trust is a fragile thing. Once broken, words could become nothing but weightless ashes. Only the heavy, daily labor of consistent action can rebuild a shattered bond. Stefani completely loathes him in this fractured moment. He forces her to feel the raw sting of life right when she desperately craves the safety of numbness. Her voice cracks as she orders him out. Ruben offers a heavy nod, whispers a useless apology, and disappears into the dark. Left alone in the quiet library, her hands shake uncontrollably. The following days bleed into a total nightmare of white lace, cold dress fittings, and hollow laughter. She plays the role of the perfect Mafia daughter, but underneath, she is completely unraveling. This sheer desperation finally drives her to sneak into her father's private study. It happens to all of us. Faking your own heart just to keep the peace is the fastest way to lose your soul. Eventually, the heavy mask you wear to please others will shatter wide open. Growing up, her father's study was the ultimate boundary. It was the sanctuary of a crime boss, built on silent threats. Now she stands completely alone in the belly of the beast. She frantically tears his open heavy drawers, scanning ledgers written in dense underworld codes. Suddenly, her breath hitches. She pulls out a thick folder labeled as the De Castro Alliance. Her fingers tremble as she flips it open. Inside are brutal contracts mapping out money laundering, arms deals, and her very own wedding, already signed by both families. She flips the page, and the blood instantly drains from her face. A hidden clause demands that if the wedding is cancelled, the entire partnership dies. Let me tell you something. Always read the fine print. The details people try this to hide in the dark are exactly the ones that hold the power to ruin your life. We are talking about millions of dirty dollars wiped out in a second. But the horror goes so much deeper than money. A secondary contract demands lethal retribution if either crime family backs out, specifically targeting immediate family members. Her stomach churns violently. This is not just a marriage, this is literal survival. Her father gambled his entire empire on her walking down that aisle. Suddenly, a heavy tug in the dark hall. Stefanani frantically shoves the folder back, slams the drawer shut, and slips out just as Marco rounds the corner. His cold eyes lock onto her, asking if she is all right. She forces a hollow lie about not being able to sleep. He nods slowly, telling her to get some rest. The absolute heaviest burdens in life are usually the ones selfish people force onto your shoulders without ever asking for your permission. Marco reminds her that tomorrow is the big day. The nightmare is officially taking shape. The final fitting unfolds in a heavily guarded inn boutique. Stefania stands like a ghost in front of massive mirrors, while seamstresses pin her into submission. Her mother, Elena, lounges on a velvet couch with champagne, completely unfazed by her daughter's dead, empty eyes. Elena remarks the dress looks regal, but Stefani offers only a suffocating silence. Taking a slow sip, Elena mentions she cried her entire wedding morning, sobbing until her makeup had to be redone 3 times. When Stefani asks why, her mother's voice turns to flat ice. She was absolutely terrified. Just because a dark family tradition is wrapped in white silk and expensive champagne, it does not mean it is anything more than toxic trauma being handed down to the next generation. Elena claims she walked down the aisle and her life turned out fine. Stefani locks eyes with her. Did it really? Elena's polished composure instantly turns to stone. The floodgates open, and Stefani unloads decades of anger. She points out that Elena spent 30 years married to a ruthless boss who lies, destroys people, and uses his own children as poker chips in a power game. She asks her mother if that is actually an okay way to live. The room falls dead quiet. Elena coldly orders her daughter into a secluded hallway. Cornering her, Elena asks if Stefani honestly believes she has been blind to her husband's monster persona all these years. Stefani stares right through her and calls her completely complicit in the violence. Without hesitation, Elena slaps hard. Forcing someone to confront their own deep denial usually earns you their absolute worst wrath. The slap echoes through the hallway like a gunshot.
Stefani's cheek burns violently, but she refuses to look away. Her mother steps uncomfortably close, hissing a venomous warning never to judge her.
Elena spirals, claiming Stefani has absolutely no idea what she sacrificed to keep this twisted crime family intact. She justifies every single nightmare, saying she did what was necessary by letting the Don use her as a Sicilian pawn. Elena's eyes are cold as ice. She asks Stefani if she seriously thinks she is the first woman in this cursed bloodline to be sold off. She tells her she is not special, just the next tragedy in a long line of them. She dares Stefani to cancel the wedding and doom everyone relying on the alliance. Misery loves company, and toxic families will always use suffocating guilt to keep you chained to their dark traditions. Elena drops the ultimate guilt trip, whispering she's raised her daughter better. Stefani zozed, but she chokes back tears, finally admitting out loud that she hates her. Elena shushes the raw agony off like it is nothing, coldly telling her she will get over it before turning away. Stefani is left shaking in a storm of rage. But that very night, she makes a massive decision. She cannot run away or openly declare war on her boss father. She cannot burn his crime empire down without putting a target on her brother's back. But she can fight from the shadows. She sneaks right back into the forbidden study, heading straight for his encrypted computer. She knows his paranoid habits well. She punches in his birthday as the password, but the screen flashes access denied. Here is the reality. When the front door is heavily locked, you never just surrender. You step back, observe, and find a smarter way inside. She tries her mother's birthday, but the system denies her again. Then, acting on a desperate hunch, she types in her brother Luca's birthday. The screen suddenly flashes green, and the computer unlocks. Stefani takes a massive breath and plunges into the digital dirt. We are talking about hidden emails, bloody transactions, and the ultimate underworld treasure trove. Buried deep inside a restricted security folder, she finds a file ominously named Wedding Day Contingency. She clicks it open, and the blood freezes in her veins. It is a full-blown hit list. Sitting right at the top is a bold order to eliminate the Dick Castro heir if the alliance ever goes sour. Her father was not just securing a mafia merger, he was plotting to murder Ruben. It just goes to show that people smiling brightest at your wedding may enact one's meticulously planning your funeral. You and I have to look closely at this together, because the sheer paranoia here is wild. She keeps scrolling, realizing this man has a lethal hit plan prepared for every single scenario. If Ruben tries to renegotiate, backs his family, or tries to dump her, her father mapped out every possible angle except for one massive blind spot. What if his own daughter flips and warns the target? Stefani sits back, her mind totally blown. For weeks, she despised Ruben, treating him like a pawn in this dark mafia chess game. But right now, he is nothing but a sitting duck. If she does nothing, her father will wipe him off the map the second he outlives his usefulness. Sometimes you have to step up and protect the people you thought were your enemies. She grabs her phone, texting him to meet her alone. His reply is instant. The old marina, Pier 9, midnight. She replies she will be there, deletes her digital trail, and ghosts out of the dark study like a shadow. For the first time in her life, she feels the rush of finally holding her own steering wheel. But crossing her mob boss father is a total point of no return. Fast forward to the abandoned marina. The midnight vibe is straight out of a thriller, smelling of rust and cold ocean water. A dead quiet except for the waves. She waits nervously at the edge of Pier 9, hiding her shaking hands in her coat pockets. Ruben rolls out of the pitch black shadows. "You came?" she says quietly.
Tension hanging between them is thick and with a knife. He demands to know why they are meeting out here out of nowhere.
Facing your fears head-on is the absolute only way to ever take your true power back. She takes a very deep breath. She drops the absolute bomb, confessing she dug into her father's secret files. Instantly, Ruben goes on high alert, demanding to know what kind of dirt she uncovered. She looks him dead in the eye and tells him the brutal truth. If this arranged marriage does not go perfectly, her father will flat out murder him. Ruben freezes in place like a stone statue. He asks her if she is sure. She confirms she saw the actual hit list, the dates, and the brutal methods. Her father has been plotting this betrayal since day one. Ruben runs a hand through his hair, visibly stressed. He knew the Don was a ruthless shark, but an assassination is wild. He locks eyes with her and asks the big question. Why is she risking her own life to warn him? Honesty is the only true foundation for a real bond. She softens, admitting he was right about Barcelona. What they had back then was real. Stefani closes the distance, letting the armor of her mafia upbringing fall away. In a quiet whisper, she admits she cannot let her father kill him. Ruben stares back, entirely raw. She outlines the impossible trap. If she runs well, her brother Luca takes the fall. If she fights, two crime syndicates will burn their world to ash. But together, they have a chance. We often forget a simple truth. Sometimes the bravest act a person can is simply to asking for help. Ruben does not blink. He grips her hand, swearing his loyalty. A wave of relief washes over her, but the danger remains. She pulls out her phone, the screen glowing like a digital guillotine in the dark, and shoves the hit list in front of his eyes. Ruben stares at the glowing screen, the color draining from his face as the gravity of the names sinks in. It is not just her father ordering the executions. The crushing blow comes from seeing his own bloodline pulling the strings. This arranged marriage was never a symbol of peace. It was a loaded weapon, and these aging crime bosses were using their own children as the ammunition. We all eventually learn a bitter truth. The people designated to protect us are frequently the ones holding the knife in the dark. Stefani meets his broken gaze, her voice seeming deady as she vows to burn their toxic empire to the ground. A slow, dangerous smirk spreads across his face. The obedient son dies right there on the pavement. They turn in opposite directions, ready to finally ignite the war. Ruben dissolves into the heavy fog, leaving Stefani entirely alone in the damp quiet. She retreats to her waiting car, where Marco, her driver, sits in absolute silence. As the imposing iron gates of her family estate loom closer, she quietly asks if he could manage to look the other way for just one specific night. Marco stares rigidly at the road, his voice tight as he says it depends on the night. The moment she whispers the word wedding, his knuckles bleach white against the steering wheel. She is essentially asking him to sign his own death warrant. True loyalty is a rare currency, proving that standing by someone often requires risking everything you have. Marco finally turns to study her exhausted face, sensing the coming destruction. She only needs his silence to pull it off. Marco holds her gaze as the silence stretches tight inside the vehicle. Finally, he lets out a heavy, defeated sigh. He plainly states that he never saw her leave the marina, and he certainly did not watch her return. If the state goes up in flames at the ceremony, his story is already set. You and I have likely realized that true survival often demands we quietly bend the rules when a greater good is on the line. Stefani blinks back tears of relief, but Marco quickly silences any celebration. If her desperate gambit fails, they will share the exact same grave. She steps out into the damp night air, her mind already locking into a state of war. For the next 72 hours, she delivers an absolute masterclass in deception, playing the obedient bride through every family dinner. To her father, she successfully shrinks into the obedient puppet he always desired. Yet behind those exhausted eyes, she is assembling a war machine. History teaches us a vital lesson. The most effective strategy in any conflict is allowing your opponent to confidently believe they have already won. Under this cover, she meets Ruben twice in total secrecy, first in a crowded cafe, then inside a decaying motel room secured with cash. Ruben paces the stained carpet, insisting that mere rumors will not stop the syndicates. They need concrete, undeniable proof to shatter the families forever. The Stefani sits quietly on the edge of a sagging mattress, bathed in the pale light of her laptop. Without blinking, she reveals she knows exactly where the files are kept. Stick with me here, because the atmosphere in that room grows suffocating. The files are buried beneath heavy encryption inside her father's downtown fortress. Ruben stops pacing and asks him if she can get them inside. She theorizes she could fabricate a story about needing to review the wedding contracts, granting them a strict 5-minute window before security swarms the office. Ruben flashes a predatory smile, deciding 5 minutes is enough to drain a decade of blood money from the server to hand over to the orders. A sickening drop hits Stefani's stomach. Doing the right thing frequently carries a terrible price, and standing up for the truth requires watching your familiar world burn to ashes. When the dust finally settles, her father will know exactly who betrayed him. Ruben sits beside her, delivering a sobering dose of reality. The moment their wealth and syndicates and sinners protection evaporate forever, they will be hunted. He searches her eyes, asking if she is prepared to endure that storm. Stefani quietly studies him. The man who manipulated her in Barcelona is now her only tether to survival. She flips the question back onto him. He's ready. Ruben reaches out, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek, a tender gesture that almost breaks her composure. He confesses he has wasted his existence playing the obedient Mafia prince. We all eventually learn that a life lived to satisfy the expectations of others is not really living at all. He smiles softly, finally prepared to let his empire turn to ash. That vulnerable confession shatters her final walls, and Stefani pulls him in for a desperate, reckless kiss. It is the fierce embrace two people share right as the world collapses, and in their dark universe, the sky is literally falling. When they pull away, Ruben rests his forehead against hers, whispering a promise that they will survive. It is a spectacular lie. They both know they are marching into the jaws of death, but sometimes a beautiful lie provides the exact armor we need to keep pushing forward. 3 days before the ceremony, Stefani confidently strides into her father's downtown office, claiming a sudden need to review her prenuptial agreements. Waiting behind a massive mahogany desk is Adriano, silently radiating the terrifying gravity of an untouchable mob king. Adriano feigns a surprise as his daughter glides into the room. She takes a seat, stating she must analyze the fine print before signing her freedom away. Her father flashes an arrogant smile, praising her intellect as he slides the folder across the desk. Stefani delivers a brilliant performance, tracing the legal jargon while her mind locks onto her true target. True discipline in life is possessing the terrifying patience to sit perfectly still until the moment arrives to strike. Suddenly, his phone vibrates. Adriano frowns at the screen, mutters an excuse, and steps into the hall. The millisecond that door clicks shut, the dutiful daughter vanishes. She bolts around the desk, jamming a small drive into the monitor just as a cold password prompt flashes onto the glowing monitor. Her hands tremble as she punches her brother's birthday into the keyboard. The screen flashes green. She uncovers the restrict folders, downloading her family's darkest secrets. Hit lists, corrupt contracts, blood money. The bar crawls, 10%, 20. Cold sweat races down her neck. 40 heavy footsteps echo in the hall, 60. Remaining perfectly calm when the walls are closing in is the ultimate test of human endurance. The doorknob turns at 80%. She violently yanks the drive free, burying it in her pocket just as Adriano swings the door wide. Her heart hammers furiously against her ribs. He casually asks if the terms suit her. Stefani rises smoothly, forcing a deadpan smile, and declares she is finally ready to sign. He simply stares back at her. Adriano breaks the silence, flashing a calculated smile. He whispers how proud he is, assuring her she is making the right choice. Stefani beams back, pouring every drop of deception into her expression, and quietly agrees. The second her boots hit the pavement outside, she releases a massive, trembling breath. She fires a rapid text to Ruben. Got it. His reply illuminates the screen instantly. Good. Now we wait. You and I both know the truth of human nature. The most dangerous lies are always delivered behind a warm, gentle smile. By Friday morning, the estate descends into madness. Armed guards, frantic florists, and endless seas of white roses flood the grounds. It looks exactly like a beautiful fairy tale. But down this underworld, in a fairy tales always end in blood. Stefani stands alone in her bedroom, staring at the extravagant white wedding gown hanging from the door. To anyone else, the Silk Lake scream celebration. To her, it looks like a beautifully tailored coffin. Her hesitant knock shatters the quiet. Luca pushes the door open, looking entirely hollowed out, aging 10 painful years in a single week. He slumps onto the mattress, pleading in a rough whisper that she does not have to throw her life away. She reaches out, gripping his trembling hand tightly. Staring into his eyes, she firmly warns him of today far away from whatever unfolds tomorrow. It is a harsh reality, but life teaches us that protecting the people we love sometimes requires shutting them out completely. Luca just stares back at her, completely clueless and lost in the dark. Luca studies her face, his eyes heavy with the grim intuition of a man who knows this violent world too well. He mutters that she is standing on a reckless edge, yet he nods, swearing to stay out of the crossfire. She pulls him into his desperate embrace, terrified this might be their final goodbye. When the door clicks shut, she dives into the stolen archives of her father. Hours bleed away until the estate falls completely silent. Then she uncovers it. A hidden thread of messages to a ghost named V. Constantine. You and I know that the devil always hides in the fine print. This extravagant wedding was never a peace treaty. It is a calculated slaughter designed to eradicate Reuben's entire bloodline. Let it be a reminder unrestrained ambition will always demand a terrible toll. The harsh glow of the laptop screen paints the dark room in a cold, unforgiving light. Constantine lays out the horrific architecture of the plot in plain text. The directive is brutally simple: assassinate the young heir, Reuben, and stage it as a tragic accident to mentally break his syndicate. And Stephanie, her own father, the patriarch sworn to shield her from the monsters of the underworld, dismisses her as a mere pawn. Once her role concludes, she is to be locked away in a gilded cage. It is a chilling portrait of toxic control, where a daughter is merely property. Greed is a parasite that devours all affection. He would gladly slaughter her husband and imprison his child for mere power. We must remember that the deepest, most soul-crushing betrayals often come from the very hands that first held us. This magnificent wedding, the pure white dress, the cascading flowers, none of it was ever about unity. It is a carefully designed snare to hollow out the rival crime family, dangling Stephanie as gleaming bait. Picture her sitting alone, hands trembling as she forwards every damning receipt to Reuben. She knew her father was cold, but this reveals an entirely new abyss of cruelty. Suddenly, her screen illuminates with a text from Reuben. I saw the files, he writes. We must move up the timeline tomorrow, right in the middle of the ceremony. When the cycle of violence demands your life, the only viable response is to strike back with absolute force. Dismantling a syndicate right at the altar is a beautiful, deeply terrifying madness. Never let the monsters of the world dictate your ultimate fate. Reuben was completely serious, yes. His message carried a chilling clarity the moment those vows are spoken, cementing her ties to his syndicate. Her father will drop the hammer. We must draw first blood, he insists. Stephanie feels her pulse echoing in the quiet room. Igniting a war inside a sanctuary packed with armed mobsters is practically suicide. Meet me at the church at 7 in the morning, alone. She stands by the glass, staring into the pitch-black night. You and I should remember this harsh rule of survival: absolute best
To strike an enemy is when they are
blissfully certain of their victory. Her father sleeps peacefully down the hall, completely oblivious that she is about to burn his toxic legacy to the ground. She slips into a dark hoodie and vanishes into the dawn. The colossal woodens of the sanctuary yield without a single sound, revealing a space that feels utterly hollow and quiet. She spots Reuben waiting in the front pew. He is dressed entirely in black, looking less like a groom and more like an executioner, a heavy duffel bag resting at his feet. "You came," he murmurs into the silence. A bitter, weary smile touches her lips. "Did you truly believe I would hide?" Reuben reaches into the canvas and retrieves a heavy black box. It is a military-grade signal jammer. The instant he activates it, every phone within a half-mile goes completely dead. It is a fundamental law of warfare. You must dictate the terms of the battlefield before the first punch is thrown. Cutting the signal severs the patriarch from his muscle. With a slow, sedative breath, Reuben hands us a tiny silver flash drive. "Everything is on this drive," Reuben tells her, his voice barely a breath against the cold stone of the church. It holds the contingency plans, the messages to Constantine, every rotten secret of the syndicate. Stephanie stares at the metal, her chest uncomfortably tight. How will they deliver this? Reuben confesses he has already hijacked the official wedding live stream. At his signal, all of that toxic truth will violently flood out the internet. The realization strikes her he had been engineering this counterattack from the start. "Why keep me in the dark?" she asks, her voice fracturing. He needed her innocence to be genuine to sell the grand illusion. It is a painful irony of love in a broken world. Sometimes, keeping a crushing secret from the one you care for most is truly the only way to ensure they keep breathing. "For my entire life, I have played it flawlessly safe," Reuben admits, his quiet baritone echoing against the vaulted ceilings. "This is the first time I have ever bet my life on another human being." Stephanie looks down at the metal resting in her palm. If they follow through, the resulting fallout will be absolute carnage. Untouchable men will finally bleed. Yet, Reuben gazes into her eyes, completely stripped of his usual defensive armor. He confesses he would rather die entirely free than spend more seconds surviving as a caged animal in their toxic hierarchy. Let that profound truth sink in for a moment. True freedom is never peacefully handed over by our oppressors. It always exacts a severe and painful price. She slowly closes her fist over the drive. "Let us do it," she whispers into the dark. By 5:30 in the evening, the architects of the underworld begin arriving. A procession of black sedans lines the driveway, unloading ruthless bosses in tailored suits and wives draped in heavy diamonds. Two historically bitter factions nations sit shoulder to shoulder to witness a fabricated peace treaty. They have absolutely no idea they have just secured front row tickets to their own demolition. At 10 minutes to 6, Stephanie stands alone before a tall mirror. She plays the role of the perfectly obedient Mafia princess in that suffocating white gown. Yet hidden beneath layers of expensive silk, the silver flash drive is securely taped to her bare thigh. You and I know that the most innocent appearances often conceal the deadliest weapons. Then, a heavy knock from Marco shatters the silence. The final act has arrived. Marco fills the doorway, his broad features unreadable, like a slab of cold granite. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" he asks. His voice is a low rumble. "No," Stephanie replies, her breath shallow. Marco offers a slow, deliberate nod. "Good," he murmurs. "That means your head is clear." The slow walk to the waiting car feels exactly like a march toward the gallows. During that agonizing 15-minute ride, she loops the terrifying blow through her mind. The signal jammer activates. The priest asks for objections. The digital bomb drops. It serves as a profound lesson in human courage.
True bravery is never the absence of fear. It is the act of stepping forward even when your heart is violently hammering against your ribs.
The car glides to a halt. A valet pulls the door open. Her white heels strike the concrete, and the trap is set. The air inside the grand sanctuary is thick with tension, heavy enough to choke on. 300 of the most violent figures in the underworld are confined within 4 walls. Stephanie spots her father in the front row, radiating a sickening, smug pride. Her mother sits beside him, weeping quietly. Up at the altar, looking like a dark angel in a sharp tuxedo, stands Reuben. Their eyes lock across the sea of dangerous faces, and he offers one microscopic grounding nod. Suddenly, the dramatic chords of the pipe organ begin echoing through the vast stone hall. It is a deeply ironic soundtrack for the absolute destruction they are about to unleash. It proves a bit of a point. Never let your guard down simply because the scenery appears pristine. She takes Matsuko by the arm and begins the long walk down the aisle. Halfway down the velvet aisle, the confirmation arrives. A sharp vibration buzzes against her bare leg. The jammer is alive. An invisible cage has just dropped over the congregation, instantly severing every radio and cellular signal. She reaches the altar, and Reuben gently takes her trembling hands. His grip is warm, serving as an emotional anchor in the storm. The priest launches into his droning sermon about eternal love and loyalty, but the hypocritical words whoosh right over her. Her focus remains locked on the hidden cameras in the balcony. The priest finally asks if anyone has reason to object. In this brutal existence, precise timing is often the only difference between a survivor and a casualty. Reuben squeezes her fingers. It is time to light the match. Stephanie slips her hand beneath her dress to retrieve the drive, and the blood in her veins turns to ice. The tape is still there, but the metal is completely gone. Suffocating panic strikes her chest like a physical blow. She knows she checked it before leaving the estate. Suddenly, a voice dripped like venom over her shoulder. Looking for this, she spins around in horror. Her father stands casually in the center aisle, holding the silver drive up toward the stained glass light. "Did you truly believe, live, I would not track my own blood?" he mocks, his eyes dead and cold. "You and I must remember this terrifying reality. Never underestimate the architect who designed the very maze you are trying to escape." And Marco, her lifelong guardian? He simply stands by, staring blankly ahead. The crushing weight of this betrayal sucks the oxygen out of the cathedral. Adriano stands victorious, holding the key to their digital rebellion. Marco, the stoic god she trusted with her life, has been an informant from the beginning. Every frightened whisper in the dark, every desperate blueprint for freedom, Marco fed it all directly to her father. Stephanie stands frozen, paralyzed by the psychological violence. Marco finally speaks, his tone hollow, justifying that he sold out merely to protect her from her own foolishness. Reuben CD steps forward, fists tightly clenched, but Adriano just laughs. The ruthless old man knew about the live streams. Hack the entire time. His lens isn't clear. Never assume you hold the winning hand when you are sitting at the devil's own table. The house always wins. Adriano was completely in his element, soaking up the heavy dread like oxygen. He let his eyes trace over Reuben, casually mentioning he held enough buried secrets to ruin everyone in those pews. Reuben locked his jaw so tight you could almost hear the bone crack, but he was entirely cornered. Then the Don smoothed his lapels, flashed a sickeningly warm smile for the whispering crowd, and leaned right into his daughter's space. His eyes were like dead black water. He whispered that she would turn around, say her vows, smile for the cameras, and pay for this rebellion for the rest of her life. She hissed it. She hated his guts.
He just smiled wider. The lesson here is simple. If someone looks you dead in the eye and promises to ruin you,
believe them the very first time. The terrified man in the robes was drowning in sweat as Adriano ordered him to finish the ceremony. Stephanie was floating in a terrible, numbing fog. Her spirit was completely shattered. She stood gripping her groom's hands, but behind her eyes she was already a ghost. Months of careful planning, those sleepless nights spent hoping to tear down her father's empire, had just burned to ash. They exchanged rings with trembling fingers, and the priest stuttered out the final question. Reuben spoke his vows, anchoring himself to a sinking ship. Then, the heavy silence shifted completely onto Stephanie. All that weight came down to a simple yes or no. You only really learn what your soul is made of when your back is firmly pressed against the absolute bottom. Now, you and I need to look closely here, because this is where a quiet tragedy explodes into sheer chaos. Instead of letting her spirit snap, Stephanie looks Reuben in the eye, whispers an apology, grabs her heavy silk gown, and bolts. She runs down the aisle like a wild animal. The church erupts into madness. The Don roars commands, guests scream, and heavy boots hammer the floor. She crashes through the garden doors, bursting into the blinding morning sun, refusing to be a trophy on her father's shelf. But reality is a brutal wall. She barely makes it down the stone steps before massive arms wrap around her waist, slamming her into the ground. It is Marco. The bitter lesson here is clear. Running away only works if you actually took the time to plan your escape route. Stephanie fights for her life, clawing and scratching like a cornered wildcat. But Marco is a wall of muscle, pinning her against the cold metal of a sedan in seconds. Her screams tear through the morning air, yet Marco does not even blink.
The heavy hitters close in. Adriano steps slowly from the cool shadows of the church. He adjusts his cuffs,
acting as if he did not just shatter his daughter's universe. With a voice like cracking ice, he orders his men to cage her. They shove her violently into the back seat. As the door slams shut, her eyes lock onto Reuben. He is just standing there on the steps, watching her get taken away. The hard truth of life is this: sometimes the people who swore to protect you will stand perfectly still and watch you fall. Reuben did not lift a single finger to save her. A sickening wave of realization washes over Stephanie. He knew the escape was doomed from the start, and he let her take the fall. Later, she paces the floor of her high-end prison bedroom. She tears off the wedding dress, launching a heavy brass lamp straight into the wall. Glass shatters everywhere. She goes on an absolute rampage, smashing mirrors and splintering chairs until the room looks like a war zone. Eventually, her adrenaline burns out completely, and she collapses on the floor, crying quietly. Hours bleed away into the dark. Then a sharp click echoes from the locked door. The lesson is simple. Throwing a wild tantrum might give you a brief release, but when the dust settles, you are still locked in the exact same cage. Stephanie looked like from the wreckage, bracing herself for her father's wrath. But no, it is Reuben standing quietly in the doorway. She instantly demands he get out. But he simply steps inside and locks the heavy oak door behind him. The air grows dangerously thick. Her voice cracks as she accuses him of knowing they were doomed from the jump. Reuben does not flinch. He admits he suspected they were walking into a trap all along. Why keep his partner in the dark? Because he needed her raw, unfiltered panic to sell the lie. He needed the Don to believe he had utterly crushed them. Reuben crouches down, locking his eyes on hers. There is a hard truth we all must face. Honesty is a beautiful trait, but sometimes keeping a painful secret is the only way to survive a deadly game. Reuben drops voices, telling her the game is far from over. Defeated and exhausted, Stephanie argues her father already has the evidence, but this is exactly where the shadows shift. Reuben offers a calculated smirk, reaches into his jet and pulls out an identical flash drive. The one Adriano took was nothing but a clever decoy. Anticipating the trap, Reuben surrendered the fake. Hours ago, he sent the real files to the authorities and the press. By sunrise, both of their untouchable families will be reduced to absolute ash.
Keeping her ignorant so her agony appeared authentic was of cold as old as time itself. Never place your entire future on a single gamble.
And always keep your true advantage completely hidden from the light. Reuben looks deep into her eyes and sincerely apologizes for the cruelty of his plan. He explains that if she had known the truth, her father's paranoid gaze would have seen right through her acting. Stephanie's mind races to catch up. They actually did it. The mighty Don is about to lose his blood-soaked empire forever. She stares at him, but for a broken, hysterical laugh escapes her lips. She calls them both insane, and Reuben simply shrugs. The heavy reality sets in. They could easily be killed for this treason, but Reuben pulls her to her feet, his grip firm and steady. He frames her face with his hands, swearing they are not dying tonight. The wisdom here is undeniable. You truly discover who will stand by your side when the world turns against you and the alarms begin to wail. Stick with me here because the stakes are about to double. Seeing the desperate hope burning in his gaze, Stephanie whispers her surrender. With their world actively exploding around them, she pulls him in for a gritty, defiant kiss. It is the absolute point of no return. The war has been ignited, and they are standing right at ground zero. But the fragile moment shatters as heavy boots echo down the hallway. Reuben snaps straight into survival mode. He mutters that they are out of time, dragging her toward the massive window. He asks if she can climb. She peers over the ledge, staring down a terrifying 3-story drop to the jagged stone garden below. It is a harsh lesson for anyone listening. Always make sure you have a clear way out before declaring war on a truly dangerous man. Stephanie looks at him as if he has completely lost his mind, pointing out the very real chance of snapping her neck on those stones. Reuben remains totally unfazed. He pries the heavy window open, scanning a fragile wooden trellis choked by dead ivy. He mutters that it will probably hold their weight. Probably. Stephanie is paralyzed by the dizzying height, but the heavy footsteps outside are multiplying fast. This is a full hit squad, and her father knows exactly who is in that room. They have less than 2 minutes before the thick oak door becomes kindling. She stares at the barricade, then back at the lethal plunge into the dark, and finally breathes out a weary agreement. Let this be a guiding thought. When your options are certain destruction or a risky leap, you take the leap every time. Reuben wastes no time at all. He swings a leg over the precipice, testing the brittle trellis. The wood releases a terrifying groan, yet it somehow holds his weight. He locks eyes with her, nodding to follow. Stephanie abandons her heels, gathering the shredded layers of her gown and scales the ledge. The midnight wind bites at her skin as her hands grip the splintered wood. She begins slipping frantic against the rough brick. Suddenly, a violent impact echoes from the room above. The squad is actively breaching the door. Reuben hisses upward, urging her to move faster. Her pulse is deafening, and the ancient lattice cracks under the strain. Remember this simple truth: practicality always beats pride. You never know when you will need to run for your life in the dark. Let us look closely at what happens next. Reuben whispers the golden rule of a steep down, never do. Naturally, her eyes dart straight to the earth. They are still 15 feet above the ground. Above them, a deafening crash signals the heavy door finally caving in. Spark to check the window. Mangrew. And Stephanie's foot slips. She dangles there, fingers scraping splinters, until Reuben anchors her to ankle from below. But the relief is shattered instantly. With a sickening crack, the entire trellis rips away from the brick. They plummet, slamming hard into the unforgiving soil. Reuben hauls her upward with a sharp command to run. The universe teaches a harsh lesson here. Gravity holds absolutely zero sympathy for your desperate survival plans. Today, you and I are going to unpack this escape together. We watch pure survival unfold in real time. Stephanie bleeds on the manicured grass of a rotting criminal empire. Her silk gown reduced to bloody rags. Gunfire echoes through the dark, a physical manifestation of her father's toxic need for control. Reuben drags her blindly through thick thorns, ripping them away from their suffocating past. Waiting on a dirt road is an idling black sedan, an escape hatch he spent months plotting. He shoves her inside and buries the gas pedal to the floorboard. It brings us to a harsh but undeniable truth. True power is not holding a loaded weapon. Real power is having the foresight to plant your getaway car before the fire even starts. Reuben violently slams the gas pedal, tires screaming against the cold asphalt. Stephanie twists around in her seat, her chest heaving. Through the glass, she watches her father's loyal soldiers swarming the estate. A man plants his boots us in a pistol. Reuben yells a warning, just as a gunshot fractures the night air. The rear window explodes, raining sharp shards over the back seat. Stephanie covers her face as Reuben violently jerks the steering wheel, launching the car around a blind corner and leaving her entire childhood behind. The corner leaves her utterly paralyzed. Her own father just ordered her execution. It teaches a brutal but necessary lesson. We never get to choose the broken bloodlines we are born into, but we always have the power to choose who sits beside us. Stephanie is rapidly unraveling under the psychological weight of it all. Reuben casts a quiet glance, silently welcoming her to a cold new reality. Her reaction is striking. She begins to laugh. It carries zero joy, only the broken sound of a mind bending under the trauma of betrayal. She is entirely convinced they will die tight, yet Reuben radiates a strange, chilling calm. He flashes a faint smile, untouched by the panic, and promises her this is only the beginning. They drive in heavy silence for an hour, running through a dozen evasive maneuvers. Finally, they slip into the dead silence of an empty concrete garage in Brooklyn. The lessons here is deeply practical for anyone escaping toxic spaces. A healthy dose of paranoia is the absolute best armor you can ever wear. You and I have watched people lose everything, but rarely with this brutal speed. Stephanie whispers into the stairwell, asking where they are. Reuben meets her gaze. This is a ghost location, completely off the grid. No crime family, the ties. They climb 3 flights of stairs until he turns the deadbolt. The apartment is a bleak shell, offering only a sagging couch and a bare mattress. Stephanie stands frozen. Her expensive dress is reduced to dirty threads, and her feet leave red markings on the floorboards. She dropped from untouchable royalty to a hunted target in a single evening. Reuben simply points toward the dark bathroom. It serves as a powerful reminder for us all. Always keep a quiet, safe corner hidden away from the world. because your entire reality can she shatter without a single second of warning. Ruben tosses a pile of clothes and Stephanie locks the bathroom door. She catches her gaze in the cracked mirror. It is a devastating image. Mascara runs like black tears. A sharp cut breaks her cheek and deep bruises are forming. She looks exactly like a casualty of war. She pulls off the ruined silk and steps into the shower. The water sprays scalding hot, yet she stands perfectly still. She lets the heat wash away the physical traces of her father's empire until the drain runs clear. This act is a profound metaphor for emotional survival. Sometimes, you simply have to stand in the fire and let the toxic poison completely wash out of your system. She steps out to find Ruben on the couch, calmly checking his phone as if he did not just declare open war on the entire Mafia underworld. Ruben looks up as she steps out, drowning in his shirt. He wordlessly hands her his phone. Stephanie takes it, her stomach dropping. Every news headline is flashing red. Federal agents are actively raiding the syndicates across New York and Rome. She swipes through the chaos, staring at photos of her father's sacred office, crawling with police. It worked. An hour prior, and she leaked a massive file of hidden accounts and bloody orders. This moment offers a critical lesson. Always keep the receipts of your suffering, because the unvarnished truth is the most devastating weapon you can wield against those who hurt you. Ruben turns to the dirty window, silently watching the empty street below. He just burned an entire machine to the ground, and now he is peacefully watching the smoke. By tomorrow morning, their toxic families will be on the screen. Freeing Stephanie trembles as the gravity settles. Her father, a man who operated like a god, is likely in handcuffs. She asks about Ruben's relatives. His voice drops to pure ice. His father, his uncle, his cousins all falling. Ruben gives her a searching look, asking if she regrets destroying her legacy. Stephanie pauses, remembering the hollow golden cage of her youth and the violence. She meets his eyes and refuses to yield, not for a second. This serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes you have to burn the bridge behind you just to create enough firelight to see a new path forward. They stand together in a quiet room, two outcasts finding a profound peace among the smoking ashes. You and I know quiet moments in these stories are a lie. The phone shatters the peace, vibrating violently. Ruben stares at the screen. It is his father, the man who taught him to shoot, who held him as a child. He answers on speaker. His father's voice cuts like a razor, demanding if Ruben grasps the damage he caused. Ruben's hands tremble. Yes, he whispers. The older man accuses him of ruining their legacy. Ruben pushes back with raw agony, insisting the ugly rot was always there. The silence that follows is thick and suffocating. It reveals a terrifying life truth. Sometimes your greatest enemy is the exact person who raised you. But you must never let the monsters who created you think they power to keep you in fear. His father promises to rip the earth apart to find him, swearing to make Ruben regret his next breath. Ruben simply replies, "You can try." The call drops. The silence is deafening. Ruben tosses the device, his hand shaking uncontrollably as the adrenaline crashes. Stephanie reaches out, lacing her fingers through his. She asks if he is okay. He shakes his head, looking hollowed out, but whispers that he will manage. Stephanie squeezes his grip. Not you, she corrects him. We will be. A fragile smile breaks across face. It reminds us of a fundamental truth. When the higher world is collapsing, having one truly loyal person by your side changes the math of survival. They sit shoulder to shoulder until dawn, watching the news feed explode as their toxic fathers are paraded in steel cuffs. On the screen, Stephanie watches footage of her mother sobbing. Her brother, Luca, is missing from the frame. She prays he vanished into the dark. Meanwhile, Ruben's family is a display of pure chaos. His father roars at cameras, and his cousin brawls with agents until a stun gun drops him. It is toxic masculinity failing in real time. A news ticker makes Stephanie's blood freeze. Authorities are hunting them. Ruben gently closes the laptop. The police do not want them as criminals. He explains they need as the final nails in the coffin. Here lies a bitter lesson. The system only values you for the leverage you provide. He asks the heaviest question. Is she truly ready to testify and bury her abuser forever? Remembering the cold life he forced upon her, she whispers yes without a single doubt. She wants to watch these corrupt empires turn to dust, and Ruben is committed to standing beside her. Then we do it, he promises. But he knows exactly how this cycle operates. They cannot reveal themselves yet. The kings might be in cages, but the soldiers are still armed. The contract killers are getting their orders. Stephanie's mind snaps to Marco, and a wave of nausea hits her. Surely Marco would not hunt them. Ruben shatters that naive optimism instantly. Marco sold him out before, and greed always wins. He delivers the hardest truth of survival. When the walls close in, loyalty is often a romantic myth sold to fools. You cannot trust your past to protect your future. Tiffany's voice shakes as she asks who is left. Ruben extends his worn hand. Just us, he whispers. She grips it tightly. Stick with me, because this is where this desperation sets in. By sunrise, they vanish from Brooklyn. Ruben dug up a brick of emergency cash hidden under the floorboards to buy their invisibility. They purchase a rusted car from a man who never asks questions and drive west. There is no grand strategy anymore, just the frantic rhythm of survival. They stop at a decaying diner in Pennsylvania. Stephanie stares at food her stomach refuses to accept. Ruben sits across from her, scanning a crumpled newspaper. She asks what the world is saying. He folds the paper slowly. Both of their fathers face a judge tomorrow, and both are pleading innocent. It is a staggering reality. Men addicted to toxic power will look the truth right in the eye, and they will confidently lie until the dirt finally covers their graves. The psychology of survival is fascinating to observe. Stephanie lets out a bitter sigh, stirring her cold coffee. Of course, the syndicate bosses are playing the victim. She asks Ruben what happens if they just keep driving. He gives her the truth.
They become hunted ghosts, and if they testify, the targets for every hitman on the payroll.
A hollow laugh escapes her. They are damned either way. She watches a waitress, wondering what peace feels like, and apologizes for dragging him into this grave. But here is a lesson we must all remember. We often the crushing weight of guilt, blaming ourselves for the choices of others. Ruben stops her. He walked into this fire on his own 2 feet. True accountability means owning your own descent into the flames. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we?
Leans in, his voice dropping. He would still be a hollow enforcer, drowning in syndicate blood money.
He grips her hand, insisting she did not ruin his life. She pulled him from the dark. Stephanie scoffs at her bruised reflection, feeling nothing like a savior. Ruben offers a sad smile. Good, he says, because you are not. You are just a human trying to stay alive. Here is a vital truth. We do not have to be pristine heroes to be worthy of redemption. He vows they will survive, but fate has crueler plans. The front door chimes. 3 men step inside, their cold eyes scanning the room. Ruben goes in, entirely still. They found us, he murmurs. Never let down your guard when the wolves are hunting your scent. Notice how conditioning overrides fear. Ruben does not panic. His hand slips inside his jacket, fingers wrapping him around cold steel. He barely moves his lips. Back door. On 3. The lead enforcer is advancing, hand near his waist. 1, 2. Stephanie's vision blurs with raw terror. 3. They explode out of the booth. Ruben yanks her forward,
crashing through the swinging kitchen doors, and dodging a screaming cook.
Their car is parked 2 blocks away.
Here is a lesson for the unprepared.
A lack of foresight will always cost you when survival margins are this thin. Ruben pulls her left, boots pounding the wet asphalt, lungs burning for air. Then comes the sound that haunts every nightmare, the deafening crack of gunfire tearing through the brick walls right behind them. Ruben pulls her down, their backs slamming against the rusted metal of a dumpster. You can almost feel the cold night air stinging their lungs. Stephanie's is trembling, begging to know who sent the assassins. Was it her ruthless father or his voiceless syndicate? The shadows shift as hitmen fan out with lethal intent. Ruben looks at her with hollow eyes and draws his pistol. She stares at him, utterly shattered. He whispers that he only wanted to be a good man for her, to hide the monster he used to be. But here is the truth of the midnight hour. You cannot keep your inner demons buried when the wolves come scratching at your door. The past always demands its heavy toll. He checks his remaining ammunition, his voice entirely cold as he commands her to run the exact second he makes his move. Stephanie chokes on a sob, refusing to let him walk into the dark alone. But Ruben understands the grim mathematics of survival. He pulls her in for a desperate kiss, leaving a quiet confession of love in the freezing air. In an instant, the lover transforms back into the weapon. He rises, his pistol barking twice. 1 shadow drops. Ruben sprints into the open, drawing the gunfire, offering his body as bait. Stephanie runs. Her boots pound the pavement as her lungs burn. There is a heavy lesson to be found here. When someone buys your tomorrow with their own blood, you do not waste a single second looking back. You honor their sacrifice by surviving. She reaches the car and twists the key, only to Ruben in the rearview mirror, dragging a bleeding leg beneath the dim streetlights. The killers shout, flashlights cutting through the gun smoke. Stephanie kicks the passenger door open, screaming his name. Ruben throws his battered body inside, and she buries the gas pedal before he can shut the door. Tires scream against the asphalt as they vanish onto the highway. Miles bleed away before she pulls onto a deserted shoulder. Ruben gasps, hands slick with crimson as he clutches his ribs. He forces a pale smile, whispering that he is fine. But there is a bitter truth you learn on these dark roads. Never believe a man who smiles while his life bleeds into his own hands. Denial is merely a shield against terror. She pulls his fingers away, revealing a devastating wound. She begs for a doctor, but he refuses. The syndicate is always waiting in the sterile light of hospitals. Ruben is fitting fast. His voice is gravel as he orders her to keep moving. The destination does not matter so long as they remain in motion. Stephanie grips the wheel with white knuckles, navigating the dark without a compass. An hour passes before a flickering neon sign cuts the night. It is a decaying motel, the exact kind of place where secrets go to die. She pays in cash, dragging Ruben's heavy weight through a peeling doorway. He collapses onto the mattress, is pale as moonlight. She lifts his ruined shirt, staring at a nightmare of torn flesh that desperately needs a surgeon. Ruben manages a bloody grin, asking if she ever learned to sew. She shakes her head. But remember this, true survival means learning the hardest skills when you are most terrified to try. Action must conquer fear. Stephanie tears through the rusted cabinet, miraculously finding a neglected medical kit. She cleans the jagged wound while Reuben bites down on a towel, shaking to keep the agony locked behind his teeth. Her hands tremble, but she threads the needle, forcing it through his broken flesh. 20 brutal minutes later, she cuts the thread, drenched in cold sweat. Reuben coughs, a weak laugh escaping his chest as he calls her a terrible mistress. She fires back a dry remark, their brief smile breaking into a wince of pain. Sitting in the dim light, she whispers that he kept her alive today. He looks up, his eyes endlessly deep, and reminds her she saved his soul first in Barcelona. Real loyalty is a beautiful, heavy debt. It is a quiet promise you carry in your spirit until the very end. As the midnight quiet settles, Reuben finally lets his armor drop. He confesses he was nothing but a ghost before her, a hollow instrument of violence executing orders for the family. She gave him a heartbeat. The tears Stephanie has been fighting finally spill over. She collapses into a heavy sob, admitting how incredibly exhausted she is. The endless running, the echo of gunshots, the suffocating blanket of paranoia. Reuben reaches out, his calloused hand wrapping firmly around hers. He is tired too, so tired it aches within his bones. But listen closely, because this matters. Giving up is always a far heavier burden than the struggle itself. Regret weighs more than exhaustion. He pulls her clothes on that cheap mattress, swearing that if they surrender now, the monsters win. He will never let the darkness take her. She closes her tired eyes, resting her head against his chest while avoiding his fresh sutures. The silence feels heavy with dread. She finally asks the terrifying question hovering in the room. What happens if they do not survive this? Reuben stares at the ceiling, offering a bitter comfort. If they fall with their hands closed into fists. They drift into a restless sleep. Two shadows praying the dawn might offer mercy, but morning holds no miracles. We must remember to never let our guard down simply because the sun decides to rise. The light does not wash away our demons. The brutal scream of Cyrus and Shadishers is a quieting. Morning Stephanie jolts awake, peering through the dusty blinds. Her stomach drops into an icy void. 4 police cruisers are swarming the lot outside. Even broken, Reuben is awake before the sirens stop. Survival instincts remain razor sharp. He grips his pistol, then slipping a cautious glance through the frayed curtains. His eyes scan the chaos. He murmurs that the officers are swarming the main office, ignoring the guest rooms. It is just someone else's tragic mistake catching up with them. Still, it is time to vanish. They gather their belongings, slipping quietly out the back exit and into their car. They roll out of the lot at a painfully normal speed. When the heat is closing in, panic is the very thing that gets you caught. True discipline is projecting calm when your heart is racing. But just 2 blocks down the road, her phone shatters the fragile peace. An unknown number. Reuben begs her to let it ring, but she answers. The voice on the line is Marco. The nightmare has found them. The air inside the car plunges below freezing. Marco, her father's enforcer, calmly tells her the syndicate is in chaos. Her father is burning with rage behind bars. When Marco asks about Reuben, Stephanie bites back with poison. Let us pause and look this together, shall we? Half the underworld wants to put her in a grave for treason, while the other half wants her alive as a bargaining chip. She is entirely cornered. Marco offers a desperate way out. Surrender to the federal agents, testify against her blood, vanish into protection.
She immediately shuts the offer down. It is a fatal error to trust the very architects of your cage to suddenly hand you the keys of freedom. She understands a grim reality.
The federal suits are often just as ruthless as the monsters currently hunting them in the dark. Marco begs for her trust, a plea that pulls a laugh from Stephanie so sharp it could draw blood. Why would anyone place their faith in the syndicate's most lethal executioner? But the heavy silence breaks when Marco drops a confession that shatters her reality. Is the sole reason she is still breathing. He stood outside her motel room last night and called all the hounds away. When she demands the truth, the hardened enforcer fractures. He whispers that she mirrors his own lost daughter, a ghost caught in the crossfire of this Mafia war. He is trying to save Stephanie, to buy back a sliver of his damned soul. It is a haunting truth. The most dangerous people walking this earth often carry the most devastating regrets. He tells her the federal agents are waiting tomorrow for one final chance to end this cycle of violence. Marco lays out the brutal mathematics of their survival. The federal agents want them both at the table, offering full protection if they help dismantle her father's criminal empire. The alternative is running until a hitman puts a bullet in their backs. The line goes dead, leaving Stephanie with trembling hands. When Ruben asks for the verdict, she spills the grim reality. Neither of them believes this mob enforcer is playing a straight game. But sometimes life forces you into a corner where your only option is choosing the slightly less terrible poison. Ruben's jaw tightens. Bleeding from his side and entirely out of allies, he admits their deck is empty. They will meet the suits. Stephanie nods, the weight of the moment settling into her bones. Tomorrow is the absolute point of no return, a threshold they can never uncross. The deafening thunder of the organized crime war is fading into eerie, suffocating silence. The sit-down is set for noon in lower Manhattan. Marco promised a safe zone, but Stephanie abandoned her belief in merry tales long ago. Let us sit with us in this diner booth for a moment, standing into cold cups of coffee. Ruben moves like a ghost, every shallow breath pulling at the rushed stitches in his ribs. Stephanie tracks every stranger walking through the glass doors. Ruben reaches across the scarred table, offering her one final illusion of escape. They could burn their identities and vanish forever. But here is the tragic reality of running from your past. You can travel to the edge of the earth, but you will never outrun your own shadow. She pushes a cup away, her eyes locking onto his. She is finally done running. Ruben looks her dead in the eye, reading the profound shift in her gaze. You have changed, he murmurs, and definitely not for the better. But stick with me, because you and I are going to unpack this transformation together. Stephanie does not flinch. Instead, she reaches across the table and anchors her hand to his. Just a month ago, the weight of this Mafia betrayal would have shattered her head. Now, she is the hardened steel holding them upright. It is a simple, enduring truth. Having just one real soul in your corner can completely rebuild your courage. The clock strikes 11:45, and they approach a massive gray federal fortress. Metal detectors hum as heavily armed guards watch the doors. And waiting in that bleak, fluorescent lobby is Marco. The enforcer looks entirely hollowed out, his eyes buried under the heavy shadows of his sins. Marco exhales a ragged breath, looking exactly like a drowning man who just grabbed hold of driftwood. He genuinely believed they were going to run. They step into the elevator, rising in a suffocating silence to the 6th floor to face the heavy hitters, the Federal Bureau, the organized crime syndicate task force, the real power. But then Marco drops a revelation that completely fractures the quiet car. Luca is already upstairs. Her little brother has been feeding the agents information since yesterday. Here is a quiet lesson for anyone listening. Sometimes the very people you bend over backward to protect are the exact ones who step up to save you. Stephanie feels her mind stall out. She is terrified for his life, yet her chest aches with a fierce, burning pride. The doors slide open to a sterile glass hallway, and they step out to face the music. Marco leads them down an endless, glaring corridor to the final door. Inside, the tension is thick enough to choke on. Agents in dark suits hunch over glowing screens. But the only thing Stephanie focuses on is Luca. He sits at the edge of a massive conference table, looking incredibly young and entirely out of his depth. The second she crosses the threshold, the room stops breathing. Luca scrambles from his chair and crashes into her, burying his face in her shoulder. He honestly believed she was in the ground. Never assume there is tomorrow if you go, because in this brutal underworld, tomorrow is a rare and expensive luxury. Luca pulls back, his eyes wet as he thanks Ruben for keeping his sister alive. But Ruben just shakes his head, his voice rough. She saved her own life, he tells the room. I just tried not to get in her way. A federal agent awkwardly clears his throat, tearing right through the middle of their fragile reunion. This is Special Agent Chen, standing alongside a sharp, unsmiling prosecutor named Wallace. Luca refuses to let go of his sister, holding on like his survival depends on the rhythm of a heartbeat. Chen looks them dead in the eye and drops the hammer. He tells them they have it all. The stolen ledgers, the hidden money trails, the blood orders. It is enough to bury both of their fathers in a concrete cell until the end of their days. It is the ultimate family betrayal. But hard here is about truth, about human nature. Sharing blood with someone does not give them a free pass to destroy your life. Stephanie does not blink. She does not shed a single tear. She stares right into the cold machinery of the law and tells them to lock the old men away forever. But you and I both know the authorities never offer a lifeline without attaching a hidden anchor. Stick with me, because this is the exact moment the bill comes due. Chen lays out the bitter catch to their freedom. They need Stephanie and Ruben on the witness stand. Chen, to look at the human wreckage these crimes families leave behind. Ruben immediately shifts into survival mode, demanding the full package. Witness protection, clean identities, and enough money to vanish entirely. The stoic prosecutor promises they will be safe. But Stephanie asks the only question that actually matters. For how long? Remember, this simple rule: never trust a bright promise without reading the dark fine print. Wallace quietly admits safety is not permanent, but insists the rival mob families will be far too busy destroying each other to hunt them down in the dark. The prosecutor claimed the syndicates will be too consumed by their own violent vendettas to track them down. But Ruben calls it exactly what it is: a massive, reckless gamble with their lives. But Wallace fires right back, stating their only other option is spending every waking moment waiting for a bullet. And the boy, Luca, is underage, meaning he slides straight in protective custody until his 18th birthday. Chen swears on his entire career that he will keep the kid safe. But Stephanie has zero patience left for empty guarantees. She looks the federal agent in the eye, tells him his promises mean absolutely nothing to her. Take notes on this life lesson: respect and trust are built on solid cement in actions, not cheap talk wrapped in a nice suit. She meets Ruben's steady gaze, sharing a silent prayer that this desperate bet pays off. Ruben steps in, his voice dropping to a low rumble as he tells the suits they need a minute to breathe. They step out into the sterile, quiet hallway, and who is leaning against the wall, casually smoking right beneath a massive no-smoking sign? The man is entirely finished playing by the rules. Stephanie immediately spirals. her voice shaking as she accuses him of leading them into a lethal trap. Marco takes a slow, deliberate drag, exhales a cloud of grey smoke, and drops the heaviest truth of the entire ordeal. It is not a trap, because he orchestrated the entire operation. For 3 agonizing months, he has been quietly feeding the feds inside intelligence. There is a deep lesson here.
Sometimes the quietest players in the room are the ones controlling the entire board. The stolen files just forced him to make his final move a little early.
Marco grinds the cigarette out under his heel and lays out the grim reality of the Mafia underworld. Her father was losing his mind, allowing pure paranoia to make him dangerously reckless. It was only a matter of time before the old boss got his entire crew slaughtered, so Marco made the only play he had left. He betrayed the crime family to save the few souls who actually deserved a shot at a real life. That included Stephanie. She glares at him, burning with absolute rage, demanding to know why he forced her to walk through hell completely blind. Marco does not flinch. If her father even suspected she knew the truth, she would be in a shallow grave. Was traced to waste. Face traced to be from carrying a truth that would get you killed. He was her silent shield through the entire war.
Looks her dead in the eye, his voice heavy with years of regret. He explains that if he had not played the ruthless enforcer back in Barcelona, her father would have sent the real butchers.
She would never have made it out breathing. Ruben asks what turns to the hitman now. The weary giant just shrugs his heavy shoulders. He is disappearing into witness protection as well. A blank slate, a phantom name, a ghost haunting a new city. The reality hits Stephanie so hard that she steps forward and wraps her arms around him. The hardened Mafia killer goes completely rigid before awkwardly returning the embrace. Here is a quiet lesson. Holding onto cold grudges is pointless when someone is actively risking their blood for yours. But Marco warns her the war is far from over. Pulling away, Stephanie walks back into the room. The choice is made. The trial looms just 6 weeks away. The old syndicates scramble to stall the clock, hoping their blood money can erase the witnesses. But the government refuses to yield. Wallace slams a folder down, dictating that Ruben and Stephanie must be isolated in separate safe houses. Instantly, the extinguishing fire ignites in Stephanie's eyes. She stares down this polished lawyer and outright refuses. Break them apart, she warns, and the prosecution gets absolute silence on the stand. It teaches us a vital lesson: never allow a towering system to force you into a corner when you are the one holding the winning hand. Recognizing utter defeat, Agent Chen intercepts the volatile tension, letting out a heavy sigh as he finally bows to her ultimatum. Let us examine this closely, because this is where the quiet nightmare takes root. Wallace is seething, laying down the absolute law. One mistake, and the government will let the syndicate finish it. The ensuing weeks dissolve into a brutal loop of psychological excavation. Stephanie must drag her bleeding memories into the harsh light, recounting the terror of Barcelona until the trauma loses all meaning. Ruben is dragged through that very same mud. They are treated as living evidence rather than fractured human beings. This reveals a chilling life lesson. The cold machine does not care about your emotional wounds. It only cares about extracting its conviction. They are finally discarded into a bleak, forgotten safe house tucked away in New Jersey. The safe house is surgically sterile, a hollow void of chain link fences and cameras, yet it is the first time they can breathe without checking their shoulders. When the agents finally leave, Stephanie and Ruben collapse onto a faded couch. Silence becomes their sanctuary. Ruben plays scratchy films from the 1940s, while Stephanie rests her exhausted head against his shoulder. To an outsider, it is mundane, but to them, it is profound salvation. Here is a beautiful life lesson. Anchoring yourself to the right soul brings our quiet peace that all the corrupt wealth in the world could never buy. Still, trauma is relentless. 3 weeks into this isolation, Stephanie violently jolts awake, choking on a terrifying nightmare about the tyrannical father she left behind to burn. Ruben pulls her close, his gravelly whisper, vows the syndicate will never touch them again. Stick with me now, because you and I are about to watch this cycle of violence shatter. Stephanie closes her eyes, letting his promise anchor her. The weeks bleed into a bitter February morning. The courthouse is a paranoid fortress. Snipers monitor the icy rooftops. Armed marshals shadow every corridor. In the sterile halls, they spot young Luca. The boy appears hollowed out, carrying the heavy burden of a dark legacy. It offers a heartbreaking life lesson. Extreme trauma evicts our innocence, forcing a child to harden far before their time. Agent Chen pushes open the massive oak doors. There, sitting at the defense tables like deposed kings, are the very monsters who gave them life. The courtroom air is dense enough to crush a spirit. Stephanie locks eyes with Adriano, the patriarch who bartered her soul. He is a hollow apparition, his gaze chillingly dead. He watches his daughter not with regret, but as a tactical error. Beside him, Antonio vibrates with venomous rage, his knuckles gripping the table.
It is a brutal life lesson. Sometimes the figures meant to protect you are the exact monsters you must. The judge, possessing zero tolerance for syndicate theatrics, calls the room to order.
Opening statements dissolve into the tension. The prosecution sums Ostini. Her legs has trembled beneath her, but her chin stays high. Placing a shaking hand on the Bible, she vows to dismantle their empire of lies. As the room holds its breath, the prosecutor asks the question that will shatter an empire. State your relationship to the defendant. Stephanie grips the witness stand. He is my father, she answers. With those words, the dam finally breaks. She dismantles his toxic legacy, exposing the blood money in Barcelona, the phantom ledgers, and the conspiracy to bury Ruben. She recounts the hollow theater of her arranged wedding and her desperate leap from a window. It illustrates a powerful life lesson. You can only push a human soul to the edge before it violently pushes back. She details the bribes and murders disguised as accidents. Through this exhibition of his sins, Adriano remains frozen. No sorrow, no remorse. He is a lifeless statue watching his own flesh and blood reduce his kingdom to ash. The prosecutor asks one final question.
Do you fear your father?
Turns Tevenins, locking her gaze with the man who broke her. I used to, she states, but not anymore. He does not own me. The gallery erupts. The judge hammers her gavel as Stephanie descends, leaving her chains on the floor. Here is a brilliant life
lesson. True strength is recognizing your worth and refusing to let toxic blood dictate your destiny. Next, Ruben takes the oath. His testimony is a sharpened blade,
slicing through syndicate mythology to exhume every buried secret. Unable to contain his rage, Antonio snaps. He leaps up, screaming that his son is Howard. The judge instantly crushes the outburst. Yet in that brief eruption, the agonizing fracture between a father and his boy is exposed to the world. Antonio collapses, reduced to a venomous old man. The ensuing weeks blur into a grueling marathon of trauma as witnesses pile evidence against the fallen kings. The jury requires exactly 4 hours to sever the empire. Guilty on all charges, Adriano absorbs his ruin like a dead man, But Antonio shatters, screaming bitter curses until Marshall's physically lugging him away. In the galleries, Stephanie grips Ruben's hand, drawing her first clean breath in months. The judge delivers the fatal blow, 30 brutal years in a steel cage, devoid of parole. This reinforces a timeless life lesson: the universe keeps a flawless ledger, and karma always arrives to collect its debts. Outside, cameras flash and reporters swarm the icy steps, but the noise can no longer touch them. The nightmare is buried. Camera flashes explode like cheap fireworks. Ruben stands as a shield beside her. Stick with me, because you and I are about to watch this tragedy bloom into something beautiful. Luca looks up, asking what happens next as Stephanie smiles, promising a fresh start off the grid. Agent Chen navigates the swarm, handing over a thick folder: new names, new histories, a quiet, rainy town in Oregon. Ruben stares at the paperwork, confessing he has never been out west. Stephanie leans into his warmth, whispering they will figure it out together. Here is a vital light led Luskin blindly into the unknown, is infinitely decaying inside a toxic comfort zone. They descend the concrete steps, leaving the bloody rubble of their past behind forever. For the first time, Stephanie is untethered. 8 quiet months dissolve into the misty air of Portland. They share a cramped apartment. The cold marble of Mafia mansions is gone, replaced by thrifted furniture they chose themselves. Stephanie stands in the kitchen, brewing coffee while watching the relentless rain. Ruben steps up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. The violent scar on his ribs is now a quiet white line. She traces it gently, acknowledging a profound life lesson. Sometimes you must away toxic luxury to discover genuine peace in the simplest moments. He kisses her hair, asking if the nightmares stayed away. For once, they did. There are no hitmen in the shadows. It is simply a brutal tale of survival, finally softening into a beautiful, ordinary life. Ruben leans in for a kiss just as Luca shuffles into the kitchen, a typical teenager hunting for cereal. The boy is beginning his senior year. Instead of flinching at gunshots, he complains about soccer and dreams about college. Their deep wounds are slowly closing. Stephanie pours her coffee, mentioning her shift at the bookstore, then asks Ruben about his morning meeting. The man who once broke bones for the mobber is now building a legitimate firm. No blood money, just the dignity of honest work. When asked if the meeting terrifies him, Ruben admits it does. Stephanie smiles, explaining that this fear is a beautiful thing. It means he finally has something genuine worth losing. Remember, this life lesson: building a simple life with your own hands will always mean far more than ruling a dark kingdom built on innocent bones. They finish breakfast in absolute silence, and for the first time, no armed guards cast long shadows in the hallway. By noon, Stephanie steps into a quiet, dusty bookstore. The older woman behind the counter never questions why Stephanie flinches at sudden sounds. It is a profound, quiet mercy. You and I know perfectly well that sometimes this greatest gift you can offer someone who has outrun the devil is simply a blank page and zeroed judgment. Then a brass bell chimes. A tall shadow in a dark overcoat steps out of the rain. Stephanie freezes completely. Her pulse hammers against her ribs as she waits for her father's ghosts to finally collect their debt. But the man just shakes off the cold and asks for the poetry section. A harmless stranger. Slowly, painfully, the violent storm in her chest begins to quiet down. She exhales a ragged breath, pressing her shaking hands against the wooden counter. A lifetime of violence does not simply wash off. The trauma leaves deep, invisible bruises. Stephanie still wakes up,
being trapped in the memory of that blood-stained wedding altar. Ruben still bolts upright in the dead of night, waiting for his father's hitmen.
But slowly, those shadows are losing their teeth. Healing from that kind of darkness demands a quiet, exhausting courage. Later that evening, they stand in a warm kitchen, boiling pasta and laughing about absolutely nothing. No looming threats or bonophones, just sanctuary. As they watch the city lights blur through the rainy glass, they finally let themselves absorb the peace they paid for in blood. As rain taps against the glass, Ruben breaks the comfortable silence. He asks the heavy question that still lingers in his mind. Does she ever regret it? Tearing down their violent bloodlines and fading into the dark. Stephanie leans against his chest. She thinks of the sprawling, cold estates and the hollow safety they left behind, then softly shakes her head. Leaving that poison was their ultimate victory. They lost an empire, but they found their souls. It teaches a lesson we all eventually face. True wealth is never about the power you hold, but the freedom to live an honest life. She whispers she would burn her father's syndicate ash to ash 1,000 times over if it led her to this room. Ruben pulls her tight. They walk through absolute hell, but they finally won their peace. 2 quiet years drift by, softening the sharp edges of their past. They trade the cramped apartment for a weathered bungalow, complete with a creaky wooden porch and a tiny yard where Stephanie stubbornly tries to keep a garden alive. It is incredibly modest, but every inch of it is theirs. Luca went off to university, calling them every single Sunday. Stephanie found her true calling at a local non-profit, helping runaways escape the underworld that almost buried her. Using your own trauma to shield someone else is the most profound kind of revenge. As for Ruben, the former Mafia enforcer traded his violent skills for corporate strategy. His firm took off, giving him a clean ledger and a clear conscience. They are finally building a legacy out in the warm, open sun. I want you to picture this scene. The porch lights cast a dim yellow glow. Stephanie pulls into the driveway, and as the engine cuts out, the night is filled with the hum of crickets. Standing on the steps is Ruben, a man who used to dismantle human lives for a living, now standing there with his massive hands trembling around a tiny velvet box. A rare, fragile smile breaks through his scarred face. He tells her that their first fake engagement was about survival, but this moment is entirely his choice. He opens the box to reveal a simple, unadorned gold band. No cartel money, no strings, just a promise. A true partnership is never forged by force. It is built in the quiet, daily choice to stay. Tears spill down her face as she whispers her answer. The ring slides on, a perfect fit. 6 months pass, and they make it official on a quiet Tuesday morning at the county courthouse. There are no grand marble halls, no crime bosses clinking champagne glasses. It is just a tired judge, buzzing fluorescent lights, and the few people who actually survived the storm. Luca stands in the front, clapping the loudest. Even Marco, living under a dead man's name up in Montana, manages to send a massive bouquet of flowers. You and I both know how heavy their past was, but this room proves something important. No matter how rigged the game was when you first sat down at the table, you can always flip the board and rewrite your final act. The gavel drops. The judge declares them married. And Stephanie pulls Ruben into a fierce kiss that entirely drowns out the past. 5 years slip quietly through the hourglass. Stephanie stands by a sunlit kitchen window, feeling the warmth of her coffee mug. Silence in this house is not the heavy dread of a cartel war. It is the sweet, earned quiet of a life reclaimed. Soft footsteps break the peace as a 3-year-old girl shuffles into the room, dragging a battered stuffed rabbit. She has Ruben's air and her mother's stubborn jaw. When the little girl demands breakfast, Stephanie just smiles and lifts her into the air. It proves that no matter how much ash covers your past, you can always plant a garden in it. Ruben wanders in the next, the hardened enforcer melted into a gentle father. He kisses his wife, scoops up his daughter, and they make pancakes together. Watching her husband flip those pancakes, a profound wave of realization crashes over Stephanie. She actually did it. She clawed her way out of a living nightmare and built a true sanctuary. We often forget that genuine peace is rarely handed over free. It is something you have to bleed for, fighting until your knuckles are bare. But surviving always comes with a heavy tab. Later that afternoon, she takes a slow, solitary drive out to a forgotten cemetery on the edge of town. She walks past rows of weathered stones until she stops at Marco's grave, her former shadow, her loyal protector. His tired heart finally gave out a year ago. The doctors promised it was quick and painless. Staring at the winter grass, she desperately hopes they were telling the truth. She kneels in the damp grass, resting for fresh flowers against the cold granite. Some things and slowly trace the carved letters of Marco's name. In the total stillness of the cemetery, she starts talking to him. She tells him all about the fierce little girl he never got the chance to meet, laughing softly as she admits her daughter is just as stubborn as she ever was. You and I both always know we need to honor the anchors in our lives, the loyal ones who held the lines when the line for us when the night was pitch black. A cold wind rustles through the autumn branches as she whispers a final, tearful thank you. Fast forward to the deep blue of evening. Their house is perfectly quiet, the baby lost in dreams. Stephanie and Ruben sit on the porch, shoulders pressed together, watching the fireflies. Out there in the cool dark, the conversation turns heavy. Ruben's voice drops low as he asks if the brutal ghosts of their fathers ever haunt her thoughts anymore. She leans her head against his chest, admitting the memories are finally fading. 2 years ago, her father's violent reign ended exactly the way it began, with a cold blade in a dusty prison yard. She had not shed a single tear over it. It is a harsh truth. Toxic forces that control you only lose their grip the moment you refuse to look back. Meanwhile, Ruben's father rots away in solitary confinement, choking on his own bitter poison. She asks what would have happened if they had never met in that neon club. Ruben answers instantly he would be a hollow ghost sitting on a Mafia throne he despised. He looks deep into her eyes and tells her the absolute, unvarnished truth. She pulled his soul straight out of the fire. Stephanie smiles, tracing the rough line of his jaw, and whispers that he did the exact same thing for her. We spend so much time looking for perfect saviors, but the truest form of love is just two broken people choosing to carry each other's weight. Sit together beneath a forgotten bead of stars, letting the surreal reality wash over them. She went from shivering at a Mafia office, waiting to be sold off to a cartel, to breathing the crisp Portland air with the family she built from scratch. Her life is not spotless, but it is hers. The years bleed away until one rainy afternoon, their daughter sits them down, finally Ollie old enough to ask how they met. Stephanie knows Dodger the bloody deeds, shielding her child from the crim stains of the syndicate. Instead, she tells her a beautiful legend. She speaks of a girl trapped in a venomous world, and the quiet, dangerous man who helped her burn it to the ground. She teaches her the immense courage it takes to strike a match to everything you know. Listen closely, because this is the beating heart of it all. Real freedom is never handed over for free. The toll is exacted in blood, in quiet tears, and in abandoning pieces of yourself you thought you needed to survive. But every single Stephanie carries was just a map leading her to this warm living room. She traded a hollow empire for a child who will never flinch at shadows, the ultimate, sweetest revenge. We have watched her walk through the fire, but let us look at where the ashes settled.
Years later, standing in the doorway of her daughter's room, that ancient terror dissolves into a profound gratitude. The true measure of a life is not the power you wield, but the miracle of simply waking up safe. Sometimes the most sacred thing you can do is honor the hands that kept you from drowning.
She thinks of Reuben, who stayed when the world caught fire. She thinks of Luke, who offered grace instead of a bullet, and Marco, who stood like a wall against the Reaper. She switches off the light and walks soft down the hall to her husband. He asks if the little one is asleep and pulls her close. They stand in the dark, anchored in the beautiful, ordinary life they forged from absolute ruin. We come to the end of our time together today. Outside, the machinery of the underworld grinds on, chewing up the innocent and spitting out empires of hollow greed. But that noise no longer reaches her. Inside a quiet house framed by old oak trees, there is only stillness. Stephanie was bred to be currency for violent men, meant to be traded at the altar to solidify a blood-stained alliance. Instead, she flipped the board entirely. She proved that trauma is not a life sentence. You and I can take a simple lesson from her quiet rebellion. No matter how deep the cycle of violence runs, you always hold the pen to your own survival. She built a sanctuary from the ashes of their control. Have a good night. Remember to keep writing your way to the light. Stephanie's conflict with her father, mother and brother reveals a painful but important lesson about family loyalty. Many people are taught that family comes first, and in many situations, loyalty to family can be beautiful. However, this story shows the dark side of loyalty when it is used as a weapon. Adriano repeatedly tells Stephanie that everything he does is for her protection and for the good of the family. Her mother also pressures her to accept sacrifice as tradition. But beneath these words is a cruel expectation. Stephanie must surrender her future to protect the family's power. This is not healthy loyalty. It is emotional control. The story teaches that love for family should not require someone to destroy their own life, marry against their will, or live in fear. Stephanie, yes, younger brother Luca, becomes the emotional pressure point used against her. She returns home because she fears he will be harmed, showing her deep love and responsibility. But Luca's response is equally important. He tells her not to sacrifice herself for him. This moment carries a strong educational message. True family love should free people, not trap them. A healthy family does not demand silence, obedience, or suffering in exchange for belonging. The story here encourages viewers to question harmful traditions that are justified by phrases like "this is how our family works" or "we all had to do it." Not every family expectation is morally right. Sometimes breaking a destructive pattern is the bravest act a person can take. Stephanie's journey teaches that loyalty will include respect, safety, and mutual dignity. When family loyalty becomes a tool for control, it is no longer love. It becomes a burden that must be challenged.